Welcome. I'm Joe Rendy, the 68th Supervisor of the town of North Castle, New York. We are pleased to present this film today, which celebrates the 250th anniversary year of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It tells the story of the important events which occurred right here in the town of North Castle during our Revolutionary War. We hope everyone watching enjoys learning the history of the events that occurred here in the town of North Castle, which changed the course of the War for Independence. Enjoy the film. School is now in session.
Good morning, everyone. Today's lesson will be taught in the historic East Middle Patten one-room schoolhouse, just like was done in the 1800s. Back then, students ages 5 to 18 all learned together in this one room, with each student working on age-appropriate tasks for the topic. This old schoolhouse was in use until the early 1960s. Yes?
Did the Revolutionary War really happen here like the sign says?
Yes, it's true. There were Revolutionary War militia activities that took place in part on this spot. This is a good opportunity for us to talk about some of North Castle's most important history that many historians feel were critical to the colony's becoming an independent nation. It is generally known that the war was fought all over the Northeast to the Mid-Atlantic states, but they also fought right here in North Castle, which was the scene of one of the first battles of the war.
In the beginning, America was just a colony of the vast English Empire, and the colonists were subjects of the King of England. In 1773, the colonists were increasingly unhappy with the lack of representation in England and the taxes they were being charged. So a group of colonists in Massachusetts threw tea into the Boston harbor to protest these taxes that December, which only increased the tension between the two sides. Almost a year later, from September to October 1774, the First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia. There was a lot of debate about how England was trying to manage the colonies and how much England was taking in taxes. The colonists felt they needed more of a say in how things got done. England refused to allow representation. At the Second Virginia Convention on March 23, 1775, during continuing debate on the subject of independence, Patrick Henry gave a speech with the famous line, "Give me liberty or give me death." You are probably familiar with the ride of Paul Revere in Massachusetts, where he shouted, "The British are coming," which happened on April 18, 1775. That was when England sent some troops to stop the uprising, and the shot heard round the world was fired at the Battle of Lexington and Concord in the first major military campaign. Many colonists wanted to separate from England, and they were known as rebels or patriots. The colonists who didn't want to separate were known as loyalists. But it was eventually decided to declare their independence from England, and a formal document we all know as the Declaration of Independence was created to make it clear to England the colonies intended to be independent.
I'm standing in front of 35 South Broadway in White Plains, which is currently known as Armory Plaza. This is where the Declaration of Independence was first read in Westchester County. There is a monument you can visit here on the corner of Mitchell Place and South Broadway, which reads, "Site of the County Courthouse, where on July 10, 1776, the Provincial Congress proclaimed the passing of the dependent colony and the birth of the independent state of New York."
On the stone walkway that leads to the monument, the following words are carved. These stones are from the foundation of the original courthouse. The reaction to the Declaration of Independence in England was swift and fierce. Within a month, New York Harbor was filled with British ships. They docked in Brooklyn and sent troops ashore to put an end to the uprising of the colonies. George Washington was appointed by the Continental Congress to lead American troops fighting against the British.
Let's talk about one of the important battles of the war that happened right here in North Castle, the Battle of White Plains. Right now I'm standing at Miller Hill Park with General George Washington. According to Westchester County's Department of Parks, Miller Hill Park is the only Revolutionary War battle site in Westchester County still in its natural setting. General, please tell us about the Battle of White Plains.
Well, the New York campaign in reality started on August 27th, crossing over from Staten Island into the village of Gravesend, which is in your modern-day Brooklyn today. The Battle of Brooklyn was a disaster for us. I had 13,000 men. 3,000 men were captured or killed during that battle. And that happened in one day.
Escaping the onslaught, Washington crossed the East River with his troops, and they were continuously driven northward through Manhattan and into the Bronx.
October 12th, and when I start to enter Westchester County, Colonel Glover is protecting my rear right flank. He has 1,000 Marbleheaders with him. And at that point, on that morning, on October 18th, Glover takes out his spyglass. What does he see in the distance? 4,000 British and Hessian troops landing at Pell's Point. So you could say the Battle of Pell's Point is the beginning of the campaign here in Westchester County. Glover sends 750 men to hold back those men just long enough so I could escape up here to these 6 hills in Westchester County to defend this area. We fought on 6 hills that surrounded the little village of White Plains. Chatterton Hill, Hatfield Hill, Purdy Hill, Travis Hill, all of which are part of today's White Plains. Merritt Hill in today's Harrison, and lastly, Miller Hill, which is in North White Plains hamlet of North Castle. It rained for a couple of days, during which we moved the right flank to Miller Hill. After the rain, Sir William Howe tried to take our supplies, but our fighters held Hatfield Hill and Merritt Hill. Then the British marched up Broadway and White Plains. At Chatterton Hill, my Continental troops held their own for a while. But when the paid foreign soldiers, known as Hessians, arrived and charged up the hill, it was devastating. They completely overwhelmed our ill-equipped militia, who didn't even have bayonets, forcing us to retreat off that hill.
I'm standing here on Broadway where British soldiers marched on their way to Miller Hill, which is behind me in the distance.
British soldiers tried to storm Miller Hill, as they have done with Chatterton's Hill, but failed. Colonel Glover and his 14th Continentals, made up of men from Marblehead, Massachusetts, positioned right here on Miller Hill. They had to drag several cannons up this very steep hill and dig entrenchments with only shovels, creating the mounds of dirt and rocks we see right here.
The earthworks are the mounds of dirt and rocks you see behind me.
We unleashed a devastating artillery barrage with cannons. Backup units and lookouts were positioned on Mount Misery over there. The group on Miller Hill were here to fight. The British were not able to withstand this bombardment and quickly retreated, marking the end of the 5th and final action of the Battle of White Plains. We stopped the British from advancing any further up the Hudson Valley, and on November 5th, 1776, Howe took his entire British army back to the city of New York. It was the first battle won by the Continental Army and me. There are many historians who consider this an important turn of events. If the British could have defeated us at White Plains, the British could have effectively ended the war. Well, I could see these rocks, if they could speak, if they could communicate with us, they probably witnessed soldiers walking over them, trying to lug those 2,500-pound cannons up this hill. You go to the edge here, this hill is very steep.
Imagine trying to pull all of your equipment and artillery and supplies up this steep hill.
But this hill has a lot of history and a lot of importance.
This battlefield is now owned by the citizens of Westchester County. The town of North Castle placed a standing metal marker at the field at the bicentennial celebration in 1976. The marker reads, Miller Hill, shots fired from this hill November 4th, 1776, by Colonel John Glover's troops, ended Battle of White Plains and turned tide of revolution. There is also a congressional plaque that reads, October 31st, 1776. Following the engagement on Chatterton Hill, Washington's army retired to new lines extending east from this point. These earthworks protected the right wing of Washington's army, erected by Act of Congress, May 18, 1926. After the important victory at Miller Hill in North Castle for George Washington and the colonies, the British retreated and stopped their pursuit northward, protecting New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut from further attacks. On Nethermont Avenue at Freedom Road in the North White Plains hamlet of North Castle is a place called Mount Misery. The colonists used this high point as a lookout during the Battle of White Plains.
Some say it got its name because it was a miserable place to be stationed, and some say it got its name because there was a massacre of Native Americans by Huguenots from New Rochelle about a century earlier on this hill.
Here is an actual Revolutionary War cannonball found on Miller Hill. It's a little smaller than an apple and weighs 4 pounds, which is almost the weight of a 2-liter bottle of soda. In the short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, author Washington Irving talks about a Hessian soldier who loses his head to a cannonball during the Revolutionary War. This was most likely inspired by an entry in the journal of General William Heath, written during the Battle of White Plains as he defended Merritt Hill. On the morning after Halloween, November 1st, 1776, Heath described seeing a cannonball taking off the head of a Hessian soldier alongside a dead horse. Here I am in front of the Elijah Miller House. It's located below Miller Hill in the North White Plains hamlet of North Castle. During the war, not only did Washington use this home as one of his field offices, but it was also used as a field hospital. I'd like you to meet Anna Miller, who is going to share some of her experiences of living in this home during the war.
Well, my name is Anna Tay Fisher Miller, but my friends call me Anna. I was born in 1728. I married my husband Elijah Miller, and this house that we're in is one of the farmhouses that was on his father's original 600-acre farm. And when his father passed on, Elijah had 200 acres, and then we moved here into this house. And we raised 7 children in this house. We were having a very lovely life until the war came. And once the Revolutionary War was declared, Elijah actually had gone to White Plains at the courthouse to hear the first reading of that declaration. And it was on that day that the state of New York was born. And he had left our home a British citizen. And when he came home, he was an American. But we were at war. One of the things about the Revolutionary War that people don't really think about is that it was really our first civil war. We were all British citizens, and we were happy to be British citizens. I was born a British citizen. And it wasn't until we declared our independence that people had to choose sides. And they didn't really choose to be loyal to the king. They had always been loyal to the king. It was those of us who chose to be patriots and strive for independence that became the traitors to the king. which had the war turned in a different direction, we could have lost our homes or our lives and all of our possessions and probably been driven out of the country, as the Loyalists really were after the war. So he and two of our sons, John, who was 20, and Elijah Jr., who was just 15, went off to serve at the Battle of Brooklyn with General Washington. And it was there that my Elijah was wounded and brought home to me. And on August 21st of 76, he passed on. But our sons were still serving. Early in October of 76, General Charles Lee was quartered here. General Washington had sent him ahead to find safe quarters as they retreated from Brooklyn. I opened the door to a tall man who I'd never seen before, but I knew immediately who it was, and it was General Washington. And on that one cold night that was just so terrible, I allowed him and offered him my bedchamber so that he could have a solid bed for the night and a warm meal. And he was very thankful. And he spent several days here, and the battle raged from the hill above our home, and shots were fired from 12-pound cannon from above our home across Bronx's River to strike the British and the Hessians on the other side. We had a field hospital here for the troops that were retreating ahead of General Washington and making their way through Pell's Point. They were brought here for the field hospital, and we would dress their wounds as best we could. And Abraham at 11 was the surgeon's mate, and he would help as well. And then when we were able to move them on to safer quarters, the battle arrived here with General Washington.
During the mid-1800s, John MacDonald interviewed survivors of the Revolutionary War for their reactions and memories of the war. This time from Ann Miller's daughter, Zipporah Miller Davis.
General Lee's headquarters were at my mother's a day or two before the Battle of White Plains, and that morning, or the day before, he advised us to move back, observing, "If you stay here, you'll have a very troublesome time." We started in the morning in an ox cart, with beds and horses, and some of our furniture for North Castle, where we remained 8 or 10 days, stopping not long after we left home upon a high hill where we saw the fight on Chatterton Hill. General Washington had his headquarters at our house for one day, and slept there one night when my mother gave him her own bed, the only time she ever resigned it. After the battle at Eastchester, the American wounded, or at least some of them, were brought first to our house for some days, and then to the hospital at North Castle Church. Zipporah Miller, from the MacDonald Papers.
After the Battle of White Plains was over here in the end of October, around November 4th, General Washington moved on north. And it was on that same day that an American, Major Austin of Massachusetts, marched through White Plains and burned the town. He burned the original courthouse where the Declaration of Independence had been read. He burned down 2 taverns, our church, where my husband was at rest, and 7 homes, and drove the women and children out into the cold in their bedclothes. And it was a terrible thing that General Washington had always said, that they were never to take more from us than they needed. And he court-martialed that man. And after that, we just were making our way as best we could because crops needed to be harvested and we needed to prepare for the winter. And it was on December 22nd that I was brought word that my sons had died in camp of the fever. And I knew at that time that the family that was here was the only family we would ever have. And we had to lay them to rest at the Presbyterian church among the ashes of our beloved church next to their father. So we made our way through time, and soldiers would often come by and ask for food or for water. And there were vandals that were all around Westchester. We were called the neutral ground, which sounds very benign, but it was very dangerous. Westchester was never held by the British or by the Patriots. It was always a no man's land in the middle. And the cowboys and skinners would steal for their side, in theory. They would come, if they were cowboys, and steal your cattle and take them down to Fordham and sell them to the British for the highest price. And the skinners, who were supposed to be stealing for our side and for our cause, would take them down to Fordham and sell them to the British for the highest price as well. But they would come into your home, as happened to us once, and when the Skinners came to the door. They came in and they demanded food and water, which we gave them because you couldn't deny them. And we gave them whatever they wanted. And as one of them left, he actually pulled the shawl off of Sarah's neck and wrapped it around his own, and out the door they went. So it was a terrifying time. They would often come in, steal your things, burn down your home, burn your crops in the field, cut your apple trees down, and leave you with nothing. And after the war, it was myself and my youngest children. My daughter Sarah, after the war, went back with her husband and they moved down to New Jersey. And James, during the war, was 18, and he was the only child I had who was old enough to do business for us, because I, as a woman, could not do business. I could not read or write. I would not be able to go to the tavern to sell any of our crops if I had wanted to, so everything fell to James at the age of 18 to run the home and the farm. During the war, General Washington was here several times. The first time in '76 is when the war was actually raging around us, but he came back through again in 1778. And a lot of people aren't aware that he used spies, and a lot of those spies were women and young girls. The reason for that is we were thought to be very ignorant of what was happening around us and very simple. We often couldn't read or write. So one of the reasons that Washington often used women is because we could come and go without being noticed. We would go into town to get some little wares, and we could drop something off without really being noticed. And in 1778, General Washington asked my two daughters, Zipporah and Martha, who were 10 and 14, if they would carry a message for him to another encampment, which they did. I didn't ask what it said, and I didn't ask how they did it, but they returned home to my great relief and General Washington's appreciation. After the war was over, it did not change immediately as you might think. We didn't celebrate and go back to doing things the way we had before. Those who were loyal to the king lost their property to the Committee of Forfeiture and had nowhere to stay, so they often went to Nova Scotia, and actually the loyalists from around here named their town Westchester, Nova Scotia. They must have longed for home. And one of the other results of the neutral ground and the cowboys and skinners ravaging their way through was that a lot of families would just pick up and leave. Some would go down to be down below in York City, because if you were there, it was assumed you were a sympathizer with the king and you wouldn't be molested as often. If you had a family and you couldn't afford to go down that way, you'd probably head north to New England, where there were more patriots. So by the time the war was over, almost 13,000 people had left this 20-mile area, nearly 60% of the people who had been here. And their homes at that point had been torn apart, robbed of everything, often burned. Their fields were fallow, they were overgrown, and it was a very destitute area. This house has a unique opportunity to tell its story, and there's a lot more to that story than just the Revolutionary War.
Let's move on to another important event of the war that happened right here in North Castle.
In 1780, there was a plot to capture West Point, the military fort on the Hudson River. Here are Major John Andre and General Benedict Arnold to tell us this story.
I am Major John Andre, Adjutant General to Sir Henry Clinton. I made a deal with Major General Benedict Arnold of the Continental Army, who secretly offered to surrender his command of the military base at West Point over to the British.
I am Major General Benedict Arnold, late of the U.S. Continental Army. I would describe my relationship with General Washington as one of mutual admiration. Upon meeting Washington, he embraced me and called me his fighting general.
I suppose that General Arnold had grown disillusioned with the cause of independence, and he decided that he wanted to offer his services to us.
I had become disappointed in the revolution's cause long before contacting Major Andre. It was Congress that inadequately supplied the army. Our men were without pay, they were without food. For God's sakes, they were without clothing. Our army was permitted to starve in a land of plenty. There had to come a time where enough was enough.
Arnold demanded a payment of £20,000 sterling for the sale of West Point and the forces there.
The injustices I suffered personally, the sacrifices and blood I shed for my country, went unrewarded. I was persecuted relentlessly by my political enemies, passed over for promotion again and again, never reimbursed for funds I extended the Army. I hadn't received officer's pay in 3 years. I saw the defeat of the Continental Army as not far off.
Well, the only assurance that General Arnold was in fact serious about joining our side was to have a meeting on September 11th, 1780, aboard the Vulture in the waters on the North River, as you call it, Hudson's River, in the waters off Dobbs Ferry. Unfortunately, that meeting was not able to occur.
I went out to meet him.
Our gunners mistakenly fired upon his transport, which capsized General Arnold and its party into the waters. General Arnold safely swam back to shore, but would no longer meet to discuss his betrayal aboard the Vulture.
I was forced to meet him on land.
Those negotiations with General Arnold were quite lengthy. The hour was late, and when it was time for me to return to my ship, Arnold's boatmen were fatigued. They would not row me back to my ship. General Arnold insisted that I spend the evening at the home of Joshua Het Smith. That morning, I awoke to the sound of cannon fire. I rushed to the window, and there I saw my ship, the Vulture, in a firefight with local militia with gun batteries on land. My transport now retreated downriver. I turned to Arnold and asked him how I was to return. He suggested by land, and I was given a pass by General Arnold that would guarantee me safe passage through the neutral territory of Westchester County and back to my lines to New York City. He then gave me several papers that documented the fortifications at West Point. He suggested that I conceal those papers beneath one of my stockings, and then with my boot over the top, they would not be seen. Shortly thereafter, I was traveling through Tarrytown on the Post Road, southward towards my lines. A man stepped out of the woods into the road with a musket trained right at my chest. There were two others that flanked his left and right. I immediately then reached into my pocket and produced General Arnold's pass, which they refused to accept and allow me passage, and demanded that I begin to remove articles of my clothing after they turned out my pockets. And when they noticed the sag of papers drooping out of the sock, they retrieved those articles. Only one of the band was literate and determined that the papers in my pocket made me valuable and that I was a spy. I offered them several rewards to release me, and that I warned them that I was working for General Arnold, but they would not relent. They led me east from Tarrytown along the Upper Cross Road and then headed northeast to Kensico Village to Reuben Wright's Mill to find Lieutenant Colonel John Jameson.
I'm standing at the approximate site of where Major Andre was first held.
If you travel Route 22 between Armonk and North White Plains along the Kensico Reservoir, you will see a big monument with an original millstone and sign marking the approximate site of Reuben Wright's Mills. A plaque on the monument reads, "Near this site stood Reuben Wright's Mills, headquarters of General Washington from July 20th to 25th, 1778, also occupied by other Revolutionary generals. These mills were located in the old Kensico village, which is now inundated by the waters of Kensico Lake." Kensico Village was once the center of North Castle. In the late 1800s, the village was evacuated and in 1917 filled with the water of the Bronx River. It is now the Kensico Reservoir and is used for drinking water for New York City.
We were informed when we arrived at Reuben Wright's Mills that Jameson and the militia had already moved their headquarters north to Reuben's brother Thomas at his mill, located on the Wampus River in the place we now call Sands Mill. There they found Jameson and delivered their prisoner.
We are now standing where Thomas Wright's mills were. The area was once known as Miles Square.
At the corner of Greenway Road and High Street in Armonk, you will see a sign and monuments marking the location of Thomas Wright's mills. During the Revolutionary War, Thomas Wright's mill was the headquarters for Lieutenant Colonel John Jameson of the Continental Army.
Today, the foundation of the mill and barn where I was held captive remains, and there are several monuments to mark the spot.
The Sands Mill area was once known as Miles Square. It was the center of town at the time and had working mills and shops. And you can see here the ruins of one of the mills. It wasn't until the 1850s that the center of town moved to where it is today.
And the area's name was changed from Miles Square to Armonk.
I was at the Robinson House over this breakfast where I had Hamilton and Lafayette there. That a messenger telling me that it was Major Andre had been captured. I had an orderly saddle my horse. I rode down to the dock where I had a barge waiting. Once on the Vulture, I then was no longer a Major General in the Continental Army.
Unfortunately, the tribunal found me guilty, and the only possible sentence would be execution. I accepted my fate as an honorable man. I do not view myself as a spy. Spies are held in contempt by their enemy. No one during my imprisonment showed me any contempt.
We tried a prisoner exchange. I asked Clinton, Sir Henry Clinton, commander of the British Army, if we could be exchanged. I was willing to give up my life if it would save Andre. Sir Henry Clinton refused. He knew that if he had given Arnold back, then no other soldier would defect to his side.
I have to say that you cannot help admire those who fight for what they believe in. They believe their cause to be right. I believed our cause to be right. 'Twas right versus right. Someone had to prevail.
Finally, in 1781, the colonists got the assistance they needed to win the war.
After Congress formally declared independence from Great Britain in 1776, it dispatched a group of several commissioners led by Benjamin Franklin to negotiate an alliance with France. When it looked like the Continental Army could not hold on too much longer, General Washington wrote to his delegation in France in desperation.
We are at the end of our tether. It is now or never. Our deliverance must come.
George Washington. That deliverance finally came when on February 1780, Louis XVI agreed to send 5,000 troops to help the American cause and appointed French Royal Army officer Comte de Rochambeau to command these forces. During the American Revolutionary War, the French had been secretly supplying arms and funds to help the Americans. But when they thought that America could actually win their independence from England, they were happy to send their soldiers to help defeat the British. On July 10, 1780, French troops landed in Newport, Rhode Island. They spent the year in Rhode Island getting ready to join the battle. They had to figure out where the troops would camp each day of their long march, how they would get food, water, and supplies for Rochambeau's thousands of troops before marching to join Washington's Continental soldiers. By June 10, 1781, they were ready and began the long march southward. It took almost a month by foot with all their gear and artillery pulled by dozens of oxen to get from Rhode Island through to North Castle. They came across Connecticut and entered New York near Bedford. To avoid heat exhaustion during the hot weather, the troops would typically get up at 2 a.m., march 15 to 20 miles, arriving at the next camp by around noon.
I'm standing in Leonard Park in Mount Kisco. This area and the area behind me at Northern Westchester Hospital is where Rochambeau's troops camped in 1781. They camped here twice. It was called Camp 13 as the French made their way to meet General Washington in Phillipsburg. And it was used again and called Camp 15 when they were on their way to Yorktown, Virginia to battle the British. I'm at the site of the old St. George's Church, which used to be known as the old North Castle Church. It's across the street from Leonard Park. This cemetery holds the graves of several soldiers who died in the Revolutionary War. This church was built in 1761 and stood until 1819. It was used as a hospital by the American forces after the Battle of White Plains, October 28, 1776. In 1852, it was later known as St. Mark's Church. If you look closely, you can still see the foundation of the old church here. This area used to be part of North Castle, but it is now known as New Castle. I'm standing on the corner of Route 128 and 117, which is right across the street from the Washington Rock, which is right over there. General Washington had passed through this area several years before, in November of 1776, as the Americans retreated from the Battle of White Plains on their way to Peekskill. He is said to have enjoyed his dinner seated on this large rock.
There is a monument and a sign to mark this location.
There was another more ferocious group that marched down Route 22 from Bedford right past Smith's Tavern. They were known as Luzon's Legion. This group was made up exclusively of volunteers. Their job was to protect the main body of troops if attacks came from the Long Island Sound.
In 1781, Lawson's Legion marched from Bedford by the post road passing Smith's. About 20 or 30 American guides rode in front. Smith's was the Captain John Smith Tavern, situated on the 37th milestone from New York City on the old Danbury Post Road. James Hopkins of Bedford from the McDonald Papers.
Starting in 1779, part of the building we now call Smith's Tavern began serving as a militia headquarters where local reservists were trained and ready to be called to service. The troops stayed at the North Castle camp from July 3rd until July 6th, 1781. The French welcomed George Washington to the North Castle camp for a review of the troops and a celebration dinner on July 5th.
It's very important also to know, the French were encamped here in this town, in this village. They were here. So imagine you have a small community in this village at that time, and all of a sudden, you have 1,000 strangers living amongst you for several months.
Some troops then marched south along today's Route 128 from the North Castle camp and met up with Luzon and his men at Wampus Pond, where they camped and then continued southward on to Phillipsburg.
Casting your eyes over the countryside, you felt very sad, for it revealed all the horrors and cruelty of the English in burned woodlands, destroyed houses, and fallow fields deserted by their owners. It is impossible to be more uncomfortable than we were that day. In beholding this army, I was struck, not by its smart appearance, but by its destitution. The men were without uniforms and covered with rags. Most of them were barefoot. They were of all sizes, down to children who could not have been over 14. There were many Negroes, mulattoes, etc. Only their artillerymen were wearing uniforms. These are the elite of the country and are actually very good troops, well schooled in their profession. Jean-François Louis, Comte de Clermont-Crèvecoeur's Journal.
People who lived during the years of the Revolution reported that the French built 2 huge bread ovens on the hill above Thomas Wright's mill, which was near the intersection of today's Route 128 and Cox Avenue. In another McDonald paper interview with Josham Carpenter of North Castle, he said,
"The French army built 2 very large ovens about 40 rods north of St. Mills, where they baked 500 loaves at a time in the 2. Josham Carpenter.
The rest of the troops continued along today's Route 117 to the Phillipsburg summer encampment at the Odell House in today's Hartsdale, where George Washington would meet up with them again. It was here that Washington and Rochambeau made the critical decision to change their plans from attacking the British in Manhattan to battling them down in Yorktown, Virginia. After the summer encampment around Odell House, the troops marched to Yorktown, Virginia, where sailors serving under the French Admiral de Grasse joined the fight and helped the Patriots win the Battle of Yorktown, Virginia. The British eventually surrendered on October 19, 1781. The war finally ended when a peace treaty was signed on September 3, 1783, 2 years after the Battle of Yorktown.
That's the story of how North Castle helped us become a nation. Brave men and women sacrificed a lot for future generations. And with the help of the French and some luck, 13 separate colonies became the United States of America.
People look at maps in the modern world. Oh, what's so important about your town? Unless you don't know the history of your town and village, you're never going to know what's important about your town.